It started with a house I should never have rented. The listing was too cheap for the area, and the photos had a strangely artificial glow about them, as if they had been taken to mask something. Still, I was desperate for a place close to work, and when the landlord insisted I meet him after dusk to view it, I ignored the red flags. The house itself was an older, two-story structure, its wooden siding weathered from years of rain and neglect. The inside smelled faintly of mildew, and the air felt heavier upstairs. The landlord never mentioned the extra bedroom, though I noticed the locked door as he rushed me through the hallway. For the first week, nothing happened. I went about my routine, working late and coming home too exhausted to notice much. But by the 7th night, I started hearing faint sounds from above my room. It wasn't the usual creaking of an old house settling, this was deliberate. Slow, uneven footsteps pacing from wall to wall, then stopping as if the unseen walker was listening. When I brought it up to the landlord, he brushed me off with a smirk. The second floor's empty. You're imagining things. His tone made it clear I shouldn't ask again. One night, curiosity got the better of me. I stood in the upstairs hallway, staring at the locked door. The footsteps began again, louder this time, moving right up to the threshold. My skin prickled, every instinct screaming at me to leave, but instead I leaned close. The air seeping out from beneath the door was unnaturally cold, like opening a freezer in a sweltering room. Then, without warning, something scratched across the inside of the door. A long, slow drag, like fingernails on wood. I stumbled back and fled down the stairs, heart pounding so hard it echoed in my ears. Sleep became impossible. Every night, the noises grew bolder, scratching, pacing, even soft knocks against the door as if something inside wanted out. I thought about breaking the lock, just to prove to myself there was nothing there, but fear paralyzed me. My body reacted as though I already knew the truth, that opening that room would be a mistake I couldn't take back. By the end of the second week, I began staying at friends' houses, making excuses about plumbing problems and noisy neighbors. Anything to avoid admitting what I had really heard. That I finally moved out after 3 months. When I returned for my deposit, the house looked different, hollow, lifeless. The landlord was waiting by the door with a nervous smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. I asked him directly what was in the locked room. He sighed, handed me the envelope with my deposit, and said only one thing: that room doesn't stay empty for long. I used to work as a courier for a local delivery service. Most nights were boring: packages, envelopes, the occasional confused customer, but one shift changed everything. It was raining hard, the kind of downpour that turns the city streets into slick mirrors reflecting neon lights. My last delivery of the night was to a house on the outskirts, in a neighborhood I barely recognized. The GPS led me to a narrow, tree-lined lane, overgrown and dark, with no streetlights in sight. I parked and double-checked the address. It matched. The house itself was unsettling. A single-story brick home, but the windows were blacked out, as if someone didn't want the inside seen. The front door creaked when I knocked, and no one answered. I tried the handle, unlocked. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but work was slow, my shift almost over, and I needed the delivery confirmed. Stepping inside, the smell hit first: damp carpet, mildew, and something faintly metallic that made my stomach turn. The house was silent, unnaturally silent, as if it had been waiting for someone. That I called out, "Delivery." My voice sounded small, swallowed by the darkness. No response, just the soft drip of water from somewhere in the house. I moved forward, package in hand, and noticed a hallway leading to the back. On the floor, muddy footprints, bare, human-sized, led deeper inside. My pulse raced. I should have left immediately, but something in me wanted to see who, or what, had been there. The footsteps stopped in front of a closed door, the same metallic scent stronger here, almost suffocating. That I knocked again. This time, a slow, deliberate creak sounded from inside. The door shook slightly, like someone, or something, was pressing against it. I froze. My phone buzzed, a text from dispatch asking if I had completed the delivery. I hadn't even knocked at the proper door yet, but when I glanced back, the main entrance looked different. The hall seemed longer, darker, almost stretching impossibly. My rational mind screamed for me to run, but my legs were frozen as the creaking continued, now joined by a soft, wet scratching sound from the other side of the door that I never did deliver that package. I bolted out the way I came, slipping in the mud and soaking my jacket. From the safety of my truck, I watched the house. The front door slammed shut on its own, leaving only darkness behind. To this day, I don't know if anyone lived there, or if they ever received the packages that vanished into that silent, dripping nightmare. It was a quiet night, just me and the hum of my old laptop. I lived in a suburban neighborhood where nothing ever happened, or so I thought. I had just finished watching a movie when I heard it, a faint, deliberate tapping at my back window. At first, I ignored it, assuming a branch had hit the glass in the wind. But then it came again, slower this time, almost deliberate. My heart started to pound. I muted the laptop and listened, tap, pause, that I crept to the kitchen and peeked through the blinds. The backyard was pitch black, shadowed by a tall, unkempt fence. Nothing. Relief washed over me, though my hands were still trembling. I turned back to the living room, but the tapping resumed, this time on the sliding glass door. I froze. Whoever, or whatever, was out there was closer now. I grabbed the kitchen knife and slowly moved toward the door, ready to confront a prankster or an intruder. When I pulled back the curtain, no one was there. But the sliding door was wet, streaks running down like fingerprints from someone pressing against it. I felt my stomach drop. I checked the backyard through the peephole in the door, still empty. Yet I knew something had been there, had been close enough to leave those marks. My phone rang. It was an unknown number. I didn't answer, but when I looked back, a shadow shifted near the fence. I couldn't see a face, just a tall silhouette watching me. Panic gripped me. I dialed 911 and whispered the situation. By the time I explained, the shadow had disappeared, and the operator told me they were dispatching someone. I stayed in the living room, knife ready, eyes glued to the door. Minutes felt like hours. Eventually, the police arrived and searched the yard and surrounding area. No one was found. They chalked it up to a prankster or neighbor kid. I didn't sleep that night, convinced I had seen someone, or something, just beyond my sight. Weeks later, I installed security cameras. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then one night, I reviewed the footage. At exactly 2:17 a.m., a figure appears in the backyard, silent, still, watching my house. But what terrified me most was that it didn't move until the next morning, vanishing the instant daylight hit. No footprints, no disturbance, just an imprint of its presence, like the night itself had birthed something to watch me. It started with a house I should never have rented. The listing was too cheap for the area, and the photos had a strangely artificial glow about them, as if they had been taken to mask something. Still, I was desperate for a place close to work, and when the landlord insisted I meet him after dusk to view it, I ignored the red flags. The house itself was an older, two-story structure, its wooden siding weathered from years of rain and neglect. The inside smelled faintly of mildew, and the air felt heavier upstairs. The landlord never mentioned the extra bedroom, though I noticed the locked door as he rushed me through the hallway. For the first week, nothing happened. I went about my routine, working late and coming home too exhausted to notice much. But by the seventh night, I started hearing faint sounds from above my room. It wasn't the usual creaking of an old house settling, this was deliberate. Slow, uneven footsteps pacing from wall to wall, then stopping as if the unseen walker was listening. When I brought it up to the landlord, he brushed me off with a smirk. The second floor's empty. You're imagining things. His tone made it clear I shouldn't ask again. One night, curiosity got the better of me. I stood in the upstairs hallway, staring at the locked door. The footsteps began again, louder this time, moving right up to the threshold. My skin prickled, every instinct screaming at me to leave, but instead I leaned close. The air seeping out from beneath the door was unnaturally cold, like opening a freezer in a sweltering room. Then, without warning, something scratched across the inside of the door. A long, slow drag, like fingernails on wood. I stumbled back and fled down the stairs, heart pounding so hard it echoed in my ears. Sleep became impossible. Every night, the noises grew bolder, scratching, pacing, even soft knocks against the door as if something inside wanted out. I thought about breaking the lock, just to prove to myself there was nothing there, but fear paralyzed me. My body reacted as though I already knew the truth, that opening that room would be a mistake I couldn't take back. By the end of the second week, I began staying at friends' houses, making excuses about plumbing problems and noisy neighbors. Anything to avoid admitting what I had really heard. That I finally moved out after 3 months. When I returned for my deposit, the house looked different, hollow, lifeless. The landlord was waiting by the door with a nervous smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. I asked him directly what was in the locked room. He sighed, handed me the envelope with my deposit, and said only one thing: that room doesn't stay empty for long. I was staying at a friend's cabin in the woods for a weekend getaway. The place was rustic, with creaking floorboards, a stone fireplace, and tall windows looking out onto thick forest. The first night was peaceful, too peaceful. When I went to brush my teeth before bed, I caught movement in the mirror. A figure standing behind me. I spun around. No one. My friend was already asleep in the next room, snoring softly. I laughed at myself, blaming the shadows and the flickering light for playing tricks on my eyes. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still see the reflection of that figure standing just behind me, silent, motionless. I woke to the sound of whispers, soft and almost unintelligible, echoing from the bathroom. I convinced myself it was the wind through the cracked windows or an animal outside, but the whispers had a rhythm, a pattern, as if trying to communicate. The bathroom light cast long, dancing shadows, making it impossible to distinguish what was real from what was imagined. The next morning, I decided to investigate. I moved slowly, flashlight in hand, checking every room. Nothing. No footprints, no signs of intrusion, just the quiet hum of the forest. Yet when I brushed my teeth, I saw it again. The reflection. Only this time, it moved independently. My own reflection stayed still, and the figure behind me smiled. My stomach dropped. I couldn't explain it. Mirrors shouldn't lie, but this one clearly had its own will. That I spent the rest of the weekend avoiding mirrors altogether, using only the windows to check my surroundings. At night, I covered reflective surfaces with towels, trying to block whatever had found a way in. The whispers continued in my dreams, now more distinct: "We see you." Each time I woke, the feeling of being watched intensified, crawling down my spine like icy fingers. Even my friend noticed my jitteriness, though he had no idea why I kept avoiding reflections. When I left the cabin, I made sure to leave a towel over every mirror. Back home, I avoided reflective surfaces for weeks, subconsciously checking windows instead. Months later, I learned the cabin had a reputation. Previous guests reported seeing figures in mirrors, hearing whispers, and waking to the sensation of being followed by shadows no one else could see. I realized then that some reflections aren't yours to control, and some places remember the faces that pass through them. I was driving home late one night on a deserted highway after visiting my parents. The road was slick from rain, and the only light came from my headlights cutting through the dark, endless stretch of asphalt. That's when I saw her, a young woman standing by the side of the road, soaked and shivering. My gut told me to keep driving, but common courtesy, or something more naive, made me pull over. She smiled politely and got into the passenger seat without a word. At first, she didn't speak. I asked her where she was headed. She replied in a soft voice, almost too calm, "Just follow the road. You know where it is." I laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke, but unease crept in when I realized I had no idea what she meant. I pressed on, but my eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror, noticing how she seemed too aware of everything in the car, my hands on the wheel, my speed, even the minor mistakes I made. Minutes passed, and the silence grew heavy. Finally, she said, "You shouldn't have stopped here. Not tonight." My blood ran cold. I tried to ask why, but she only smiled, leaning closer. Her eyes seemed to pierce through me, knowing every thought I had. Then she told me something impossible, details about my life that no stranger could know, the argument I had with my boss that morning, the lie I told my neighbor last week. My hands tightened on the wheel, panic rising that I swerved slightly, almost losing control, and asked her to get out. She didn't move. "Soon," she whispered. That was all she said, but the tone made it clear it wasn't a suggestion. I slammed the brakes near a roadside diner and jumped out, leaving the door open. When I turned back, she was gone. No footprints on the wet pavement, no trace of her in the empty highway. My heart raced as I ran inside the diner, explaining to the night clerk what had just happened. He nodded, pale, and muttered, "You're lucky. Most people never get out." Even now, months later, I replay that night in my head. The memory of her knowing too much, the way her calm voice hid something predatory, and the emptiness of the highway haunt me. I still drive that route sometimes, but only in daylight, and I never pick up strangers. That night taught me that some people, or entities, are not merely lost travelers, they are watching, waiting for the moment you make the wrong choice. It started innocently enough. I had just moved into a small apartment complex in the city. The rent was cheap, and the location convenient. At first, my neighbor seemed friendly, waving from her balcony, chatting briefly in the hallways. But soon, I noticed odd things. Her curtains were always open, even at night, and I could feel eyes on me, though I rarely saw her outside. I shrugged it off as paranoia. Everyone watches everyone in an apartment building, right? The first real incident happened one night when I returned from work. The hallway lights flickered, and I caught a glimpse of someone moving behind a frosted glass door across from my unit. When I looked closer, I realized it was her, standing still, staring directly at my apartment. My stomach turned. I told myself it was coincidence, that maybe she was just heading to her apartment. But the feeling of being observed didn't go away. Then came the noises. At first, it was subtle, footsteps pacing above me, occasional thumps in the walls. But soon, I could hear faint whispers when no one else was around. I started noticing patterns. Her lights would go off moments after I did, she would leave her apartment at odd times that coincided with mine, and I began finding things slightly out of place, small items moved, doors slightly ajar. Each incident made the air heavier, more suffocating. One evening, I returned home to find a note slipped under my door. It was typed, precise, and chilling, "I see you. Always." Panic surged through me. I called the police, but without evidence of a crime, there was little they could do. I installed cameras inside my apartment, trying to catch her in the act. A week later, reviewing the footage, I froze. At 3:14 a.m., a figure appears in my living room, my curtains untouched, doors locked, standing silently, watching me sleep. And then, it vanished as quickly as it appeared. That I moved out 2 days later, leaving behind everything I couldn't carry in haste. Looking back, I realized how subtle the signs were at first, how easy it was to dismiss the early warnings. Now, I'm hyper-aware in every new place I live, never assuming privacy is guaranteed. Some people, or some presences, don't just watch from a distance. They wait until you notice, just to see your reaction. I had just moved into an old apartment above a small cafe downtown. The place was charming in photos, but the wooden floors creaked with every step, and the walls were thin. The first few nights were quiet, except for the usual city hum, distant sirens, late-night traffic. But on the fourth night, I noticed something strange, a faint scratching noise coming from beneath the floorboards. I told myself it was just mice or the building settling, nothing more. The scratching grew louder over the next few days. It didn't matter what time of day it was, sometimes it happened in the middle of the afternoon, sometimes just past midnight. I tried to ignore it, but my nerves frayed. One night, I placed my ear close to the living room floor. The sound wasn't random, it was deliberate, almost like something was digging, clawing, or pacing beneath me. A cold sweat broke out on my back that I decided to investigate. I lifted a small section of the carpet, revealing the old wooden floorboards. They looked solid, but the sound persisted directly beneath them. I tapped the wood with my hand, it stopped. I tapped again, it returned, now with a slow, rhythmic pattern, almost like it was aware I was trying to find it. Fear rooted me in place. Whatever it was, it wasn't ordinary. Over the next week, I avoided the living room at night, sleeping instead in the bedroom with a nightlight. But one night, the scratching stopped entirely, then a single, deliberate thump echoed from the floor directly beneath my bed. I froze. My mind raced. Could it be someone living in the crawlspace beneath the building? Or something older, more sinister, that had been there long before I arrived? I didn't dare look that I moved out shortly after. Even after leaving, the memory of that sound haunts me, the slow, purposeful scratching, and the uncanny sense that it was always aware of me. I don't know what lived beneath that floor, but some things, I realized, don't stay buried forever. I was on a business trip, staying at an old hotel downtown. The lobby was dimly lit, with worn carpets and the faint smell of cleaning chemicals lingering in the air. The receptionist handed me the key for room 312 without much conversation, and I didn't pay much attention. At first, the room seemed normal, small, functional, with a window overlooking the street and a simple desk. But that night, things started to feel off. As I unpacked, I noticed the mirror above the dresser reflected slightly too much. When I looked into it directly, I thought I saw movement in the corner of my eye. I chalked it up to tiredness from the flight. Later, I lay on the bed scrolling through my phone. The room was quiet, too quiet. Then I heard a soft knocking from the bathroom. I got up, flashlight app on, and opened the door, empty. The knocking continued, louder this time, as if urging me to come closer. I called the front desk, thinking a maintenance worker was messing with the plumbing. They assured me no one was in the room, that it was safe. But as I hung up, I noticed something on the floor near the bathroom, a small wet footprint, human-sized, leading toward the bed. My heart raced. I spun around. Nothing. My rational mind couldn't explain it. It was a clean room, locked, yet somehow someone, or something, had been there. Over the next hour, the knocks continued, now accompanied by soft whispers just beyond comprehension. I left the light on, trying to sleep in the chair. At some point, the whispers stopped, replaced by a dragging sound across the carpet. Morning came, and the room looked untouched, normal, no footprints, nothing. I questioned my sanity, but the lingering dread didn't leave. I packed quickly and checked out, never staying in that hotel again. Years later, I learned the building had a history. Room 312 had a reputation for guests reporting strange noises, shadows, and unexplained movements. I realized then that some places carry memories of previous occupants, and sometimes, those memories don't stay in the past, they linger, waiting for the next person to notice. It was late evening when I finally felt safe enough to check my messages. I had spent months moving between apartments, avoiding old houses, and steering clear of isolated roads. Life seemed to settle, the lingering fear of the previous incidents slowly fading. Then my phone buzzed, a simple text from an unknown number. "Do you remember me?" I froze. My mind raced through every story, every shadow, every whisper that had haunted me over the past year. At first, I thought it was a prank. I ignored it. Minutes later, another text arrived. "I've been watching." Panic gripped me. My phone screen glowed in the dark room, and I realized the lights outside had gone out. No streetlights, no cars, nothing. I turned toward the window and saw a shadow moving, not along the street, but across the walls of my apartment. My apartment was on the third floor. That shadow shouldn't exist. That I bolted to the door, trying to leave, but the handle wouldn't turn. My phone buzzed again, this time with a picture attached. I hesitated before opening it. My blood ran cold. It was me, sleeping. Taken from my own apartment. I spun around, but there was nothing to explain how the photo was captured. The whispers started again, soft, deliberate, coming from every corner of the room. The shadows moved as if alive, reaching toward me, stretching impossibly across the walls and ceiling. That I grabbed my phone and ran to the balcony. Below, the city was silent, empty. No one on the streets, no cars, no lights. Just blackness. Another text arrived, "You can't escape. You never did." I dropped to my knees, feeling the walls close in. And then the buzzing stopped. Silence. The shadows retreated into the corners, the whispers faded. I thought it was over. But even now, I check every reflection, every dark corner, every strange sound, convinced that one day, it will return. Somewhere, out there, the stories continue. The houses, the roads, the reflections, the phone calls, they are waiting for the next person to notice, to feel the fear, to experience the inexplicable. And as long as curiosity exists, so will the presence of what watches, waits, and follows. Some stories never truly end, they just lie in the shadows, waiting for someone to read them, and be genuinely freaked out for the first time.